Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Keith Bailey. I'm the training director at Harmony Family Center, and I'm a fellow of the ChildTrauma Academy. During this time of national crisis and of uncertainty and even more togetherness than many of us are used to, it certainly increases our stress levels and adds to the stressors that we were already living with. And some of the small things in our lives can build and build and build and turn into big things and even escalate into a crisis situation. So this webinar is going to focus on building some de-escalation techniques and help you support the children that you care for and love. I'm going to turn my camera off so that we can focus on the slides. This curriculum that I'm going to be training from is called Therapeutic Crisis Intervention. It was developed by Cornell University in 1979. It was developed to use in residential treatment, group care facilities, and juvenile justice facilities, and it's been adapted to be used in schools and to be taught to foster parents. So this curriculum is used across the U.S. and is now used in multiple countries. And as you see, it's been adapted and developed over time, and we're looking at the 6th edition of this curriculum. A crisis is when a young person's inability to cope results in a change in behavior. There may be new conditions, new stressors on top of the old stressors that they're already living with. One question we want to ask when we see a change in a child's behavior is, what's different now? What's different now from when they were able to cope with this? What changed? What's built up? And as you see throughout this curriculum, when we looked at what we're going to do in a crisis situation, the focus is going to be less on the child and more on us and our response. So the goals of crisis intervention are to offer support and to ultimately teach the child some new ways of dealing with the stress that they're facing and how to better cope with it. So when we think about supporting a child, we want to look at what's going on in the environment and what is their level of emotional skills, and how can we help them as a caring adult to either change what's going on in the environment, to give them some of the emotional support that they need. As I said, eventually we want to teach them some better ways to cope with the stress. One thing we'll find about teaching is it's not an ideal situation to try to teach them in the midst of the crisis. In fact, that's the wrong time to try to teach them. We're going to wait till they calm, till they feel safe. We're going to wait till they are restored to a level in their brain where they can think and process and problem solve. And then we're going to teach them some new skills that they can use the next time that they feel stress. One thing that we use as a mantra at Harmony comes from the Neuro Sequential model of Therapeutics, where in a crisis situation or doing therapy in general, first we want to help the child to regulate in the child's body and brain. We want to provide safe relationships for the child so that they know that they have a caring adult as a resource to them. And then and only then can we get to the point where we can reason and reflect with them. This is when they're in that part of the brain where we can teach them to figure out what was going on, what created this situation, and how to develop their own coping and regulating strategies. So on this slide, we're going to look at the progression of stress. And this is called the stress model of crisis. We're going to spend quite a bit of time on this slide because it serves as the basis for how we're going to approach the situation. So you see at the bottom of the slide, the pre-crisis state in that blue circle, and then you see that dotted line across the slide that's the baseline behavior. And this is whatever the baseline is for any particular child. Some children are quiet. When they get stressed, they become louder. Some children are kind of loud and rambunctious anyway. When they get stressed, they may become quieter and a bit more withdrawn. So when we talk about a child moving off his or her baseline, it's whatever it is for that individual child. So first of all, we're going to talk about a triggering event. Now, I break triggers down to long triggers and short triggers. Long triggers may be things that children have dealt with for their entire lives. It may be abuse and neglect. It may be multiple moves. It may be what's been going on in the past month, changes in the past week, higher levels of stress, such as what we're all going through right now in the country. And then there's short triggers. What happens that builds up from moment to moment that causes a child to start to become agitated? And when I say agitated, I mean that they're moving off their baseline. For that kid who may be more quiet, more settled, that child may become fidgety, more verbal, may become a bit louder. They may be seeking sensory input. They may start drumming their fingers or pencil on the table. They may start pushing things. Some children go the opposite direction. Again, the children may be interactive or maybe a little bit louder, rambunctious, may start to quiet down, stop interacting, reduce verbal interaction, and their body language may become a little bit more protective. This child may cross his or her arms, may turn their head away, pull a hoodie up or lay their head down so as not to interact with you. It's not a good idea to ignore behavior at this level. We live with a myth that if you ignore behavior, you won't reinforce it and that it will go away. Well, what we have found is that some children interpret that as you don't care or you're not engaged, and it will cause some children to escalate and increase the intensity of the behavior. To get the sensory input that they need, to get the help that they need, to get what they need to cope or get out of that situation. So the escalation phase occurs when the child can't cope or feels like no one is helping him or her cope, and they start to increase the behavior because their body and brain is more dysregulated or not as calm as they want it to be. And at this stage, some children can become aggressive. And at this point, I want to delineate between aggression and violence. Violence is when there is harm occurring to the child, or the child is harming someone else, or there's an imminent risk of harm. That's that outburst, that crisis stage you see at the top of this graphic. Aggression is anything below that. Aggression is a child needing to create some space or send a message that you need to stay out of his or her space, or show that he or she has power or needs power in this moment. So in the aggressive state, children can become louder. They may yell, they may curse, they may throw things, they may push things, they may push people away, they may throw things. It's a show of energy to protect themselves. And as I said, a show that they need some space, because when we get stressed, space is equivalent to safety. The more space we have, the more distance we have from people, the safer that we feel. And then you see at the right side of this graphic is the recovery phase. This is when the stress has started to dissipate or go down, when the child starts to calm and the body starts to calm, the brain starts to calm, and finally they get back to baseline or to the recovery stage. And it's in the recovery stage when the child feels calm in his or her body and in his or her brain, that we're able to reflect on what happened and talk about some strategies of how to cope with it, whether that's teaching the child some new coping and regulation skills, or letting the child know that he or she can come to us and we can be a resource to help the child to co-regulate. So again, we don't want to try to teach a child in the midst of the crisis while they're agitated, when they're aggressive, and certainly not when they're violent. We want to do everything that we can to regulate them, to use our relationship to reassure them. And then when they start to calm and relax and get back to their baseline, that's when we can do our teaching. And on this slide, this comes from the neurosequential model of therapeutics. We look at what part of the brain we are in when we are in these different states of functioning. And when we're in the top part of our brain, the smart part of our brain, the upper part of our brain, where we do our thinking and our processing and our problem solving, we're usually in a calm state. And then as stress increases, we can go from calm to being on alert, and from being on alert to moving to alarm. We see something that is frightening to us, that is stressful to us, that we feel like we need to defend ourselves against. And as you see, we move through that continuum from calm all the way to terror. We actually move lower into the bottom part of our brain. And it's in that yellow part and that red part where we're not even really thinking and processing and problem solving anymore. We're just reacting out of fear, or we have this reflective, instinctual thing we do to protect ourselves in terror. And these lower parts of the brain, that yellow and red part, there's no sense of time. So if we say to a child or anyone else, hey, remember, if you act this way, you don't get this later on, they have no sense of when later on is, and what is meaningful to them later on, what the reward may be later on. They're just thinking about surviving in the moment, finding a relief to their stress in the moment. Also, in this part of the brain, as I've said before, they don't process rules, consequences, responsibilities, how it affects relationships. They're not thinking in that higher level way. They are only reacting in the moment. So trying to remind them of the rules, to remind them to use their skills, to remind them of the consequences that's going to happen later on, really doesn't serve a helpful purpose at that point. Now, it's later on when they feel calm and return to this higher part of the brain and feel safe in the relationship with us that we can start to reflect on what's happened and to start to build some new coping strategies and skills. So during the stress model of crisis, when we start to see that a child is triggered, we need to start to intervene as early as possible and give attention to what's going on and support to the child. Again, we don't want to ignore their behavior. And I love this phrase from Therapeutic crisis intervention. At any point in the stress model of crisis, you can engage the child or enrage the child. We can do some things that help the child to feel safe and calm and regulated, or we can do the wrong things. We can say the wrong things, and we can further enrage them and push them up this stress model of crisis. And another phrase I like is that during this stressful time, the child will see us either as an ally or another obstacle. There's some obstacle in their way that created the stress. Either they're not getting what they want, they're not able to get relief from the feeling that they're feeling, and they see things around them, maybe people around them, as obstacles, and what they need is that ally, somebody to be on their side and to offer them comfort and to co-regulate with them and to be that safe adult or that safe caregiver in their presence. So when a child starts to have a crisis or move higher in that stress model of crisis, it creates big feelings, big intense feelings, which creates energy, and it will change the young person's behavior. And then with that change in behavior comes the adult response. And if our response is not supportive, it's not helpful, if we become another obstacle in that child's viewpoint or that child's mind, it creates more stress for that child, creates more intense feelings, more difficult behaviors, a bigger response from us, which creates more stress. And this can escalate and escalate and become a tornado. Or if in that stressful event, we recognize the young person is having a difficult time and their behavior is a reflection of that, and we have this calm, caring, supportive response that helps them to regulate, it reduces the stress in the situation. It reduces the intensity of the young person's feelings. It reduces the young person's behavior. And then it kind of lightens our response. We can be more supportive with the child, which again reduces stress, and the cycle gets smaller and smaller, and hopefully it will go down the drain. We can restore the child to baseline and then get to a point where we can teach the child some new coping strategies. So we can avoid this conflict cycle escalating by listening and validating feelings. We want to let the child know that we get them, we see them, we understand them. We want to help manage the environment. If it's too loud and too noisy, we may try to turn the volume down of music, of the TV, of any videos that they're watching, or tell people in the environment that are being loud that we need to quiet down. We also may change what's going on in the environment by changing the requirements that we're asking the child or others to do to relieve the stress level. Sometimes we need to give the child choices and time to decide. If we see that the child needs a break and is not choosing to take that break as a way of coping and de-escalating him or herself, we may want to give them a choice. Hey, I see that you've got lots of energy. Would you like to go swing or go outside and play basketball? Hey, things are getting tense in here. You can go outside, or you can take a couple of deep breaths and keep playing the game that you're playing. A lot of times we redirect children when there's a crisis, but we usually redirect them to something they don't like and something that they see as more of a problem than a help. We may say, if you don't stop that, you're going to go to your room, or we want you to go to timeout, or we want you to leave the room because it's creating too much stress by the way you're acting. So we redirect them in a way that just increases the stress that they're feeling and increases the intensity of their emotions and their behaviors related to that. So if we redirect a child, we want to redirect the child to something that's positive, something that's going to be calming to the child. And then we can drop or change the expectation. It may be that the child reacts to us asking them to stop playing a game. And we may say, okay, I see that you're at the end of the game, so let's play for 15 more minutes, and then you can stop and come and eat your dinner. Or a child may react because we asked him to do a chore, and we may say, you know what, just take a break for a little while, and we'll do the chore after you go swing or you play basketball. So they're not getting out of it. We may just be delaying that ask of them in the moment to keep a crisis from building. And this is a slide that we get from the neurosequential model of therapeutics that shows that the most important part of this conflict cycle is not the child's feelings or the child's behavior, but the adult. We have to be in a calm place ourselves before we can help the children to be calm. In this graphic, you see that wherever the adult is in this state-based functioning, the child is always going to be a level or two above the adult. So if the adult is at alert, the child's going to be at alarm. If the adult's at alarm, the child may be in fear. And if the adult is in fear, then the kid is reacting in terror. So we have to do a lot to get ourselves in a good place, to regulate ourselves before we have the ability to co-regulate a child. So in a crisis situation, there are 4 questions that we need to ask ourselves. And the first one is, what am I feeling now? It may seem to be a very selfish question when the child is having stress and big emotions and maybe challenging behaviors. But again, we've got to be in a calm place and recognize where we are before we can help the child. So I want to focus in on what I'm feeling and get myself in a good place to be able to help the child. Or if I can't get there and I have the ability to bring in another adult, I can bring another adult in who may be able to help the child to calm and feel regulated. And then the other questions are, what does the young person feel, need, or want? Well, usually the young person is overwhelmed or stressed. They want a way out of the situation. They want a way to stop feeling what they're feeling in their bodies and brains. And what we need to do is to give them a graceful way out of a difficult situation, and then to later learn from that. As I said before, we need to figure out how the environment is affecting the young person and do whatever we can to change the environment, reduce the stimulation in the environment, or we may suggest that the child leave the environment and we redirect the child to a more positive activity or space. And then the $1 million question is, how do I best respond? Well, the best response is a calm response, like we've been talking about. And in thinking about how to respond, we need to focus in on how we communicate with children during a crisis. This graphic is based on the research of Moravian, who did crisis communication research back in the early 1970s, and this research has stood the test of time. Moravian looked at, where do people get their meaning during times of crisis, and how do they interpret communication? And what Moravian found was that when we're communicating with someone in a crisis state, only 7% of the meaning comes from the actual words that we say to them, the definitions of the words, and what's intended by those words. 38% of what's gained in communication during a crisis comes through the tone of voice that somebody has. So for example, I can say to a child, "That's great," and show excitement, or I can say, "That's great," and let them know that I'm not happy with them. And I go from being an ally to what they perceive as being another obstacle. Or you could say to a child, "What happened?" wanting to find out what was going on and what led up to this, or give them a chance to talk out rather than act out. Or I could say to a child, "What happened?" and let them know, "I'm really not happy with you and what's going on. I really don't care what happened. I just want it to stop, and stop now." And then you see the last graphic, that facial expression, and I would add to this, body language, accounts for 55% of communication during a crisis situation. So I'm going to turn the video back on, and look at how we need to present ourselves to a child, especially when they're at that higher level in the stress model of crisis, because again, the higher they are, the lower they are in the brain, and the primitive brain is interpreting facial expressions and body language more than it's interpreting the actual words coming out of our mouths. It's also picking up on tone. So especially with older kids who you can't pick up and hold and give that physical containment or that reassurance to them. Those kids who are telling us, I need space, I need you to stay away from me, we need to give them that space. So we have a tendency to walk into kids' space in the midst of a crisis, and we need to remember that they actually need more space to feel safe many times. So we need to back up and give their personal bubble about twice the width that it usually is. Most of us have a 3 feet bubble, and they need to stay 6 feet away or more. Again, we need to think about how we're communicating through the tone of our voice. If we say, what happened, that communicates that we're calm and we really want to know what happened and how to help them. Instead of saying, what happened? That lets them know, I'm not happy with you, and I just want everything to stop and you to get back to baseline as quickly as possible, however you get there. So one thing we can do with the way we present ourselves is to actually think about how the child interprets our stance. So the lower part of the brain, the primitive brain, is looking for threat as we go higher and higher into a crisis situation. So anything that is loud is more threatening, and anything that is big is more threatening. So if I put my hands on my hips, which I have a bad habit of doing personally, I actually look bigger to the child. If I cross my arms in front of my chest, I actually look like I'm closed off and defensive, and I'm really not going to listen to what you have to say, and I don't really care about what you have to say. So we want to present our bodies in a way that shows them that we are respectful of the space they need, and we care about what's going on with them right now. And we want them to feel safe with us. So again, we back up, and we can even drop a foot back and turn our hips so that we're at an angle to the child. That way we actually look smaller, as that lower part of the brain is looking for more cues of danger. We actually look like a smaller person turned sideways than squared up on them. And then we need to be aware of what we're doing with our hands. Some of us talk with our hands and gesticulate and have our hands up in the air, and everything we say, we have a gesture. And this is exacerbated and gets bigger in a crisis situation. So what we need to remember is to keep our hands low, keep them in front of us, not behind us, not in our pockets, because some kids may think, well, what do you have in your pocket? What do you have behind you? We keep our hands in front so that they can see our hands. And we want to turn our hands up like this, as if we can receive what you're saying to us, what you're giving to me right now. And I may have something to offer you right now. I can offer you help. So if we can be aware of our tone of voice and our facial expressions, have that caring, concerned look on our face rather than one that's put out or frustrated with the child, and if we can put our body in a position that doesn't come across as threatening, that helps the child to see us as a help, as an ally in a crisis situation, and not as another obstacle. I'm going to turn the camera off again. So we're going to go through a series of what to think, what to do, and what to say. And some of these things we've already discussed before. What to think? Ask yourself the 4 questions. What am I feeling now? I need to think about my state of being, where I am on that stress model of crisis, and how I can calm myself so I can be a calm and supportive presence to the child. And then what does the young person feel, need, or want? How can I give them a graceful way out of this difficult situation? How can I change the environment? How can I respond in a positive way? We need to use positive self-talk to get ourselves into a good space. And then we need to remember to be accepting and supporting and non-judgmental of what's going on with the child. Child's in a difficult situation, and we need to remember that that's where the child is, and we need to be a support to the child rather than thinking the child has messed up my time, my day, this activity. What to do? Again, take a deep breath. We need to get ourselves calm, step back, give the situation space. It helps the child, it helps us as well. Give the situation time. Sometimes we may ask the child to do something. Hey, I see you're having a tough time. You can go outside and swing or play basketball, and we may need to give them the time to actually process that, to switch gears and decide how they're going to respond. If the child is up yelling and ranting and needing to get the energy out, if we figure out that getting the energy out is going to be helpful, we can choose to sit down if it's appropriate and if we feel safe. And that way, the child is the biggest person in the room and maybe the most powerful person in the room for that moment. And they can get this energy out as long as they're not hurting themselves or others. As I said before, we may drop or delay a request to reduce the stress in that situation. And during this time, whatever we do, we need to remember the importance of body language and facial expressions. What not to do, as I said before, don't discuss consequences or punishments. In the midst of that crisis, that's really meaningless to the child at that time. They're not at a place in their brain to process that. Don't blame the child for what's going on. We may talk about what got them to that situation and their responses as a part of the teaching process later on, but we don't want to blame the child for his or her feelings in that moment. And again, don't be another obstacle for them. Stay in the moment, be supportive in the midst of the crisis situation, and be an ally. What to say? Very little. We've got to remember that language is processed in that very top level of the brain. And the higher the child is on the crisis curve, the lower they are in their brain. They're not processing the words. Remember, they're picking up on tone of voice and body language, but they're not processing the definitions and intents, the intentions of the word. We want to do active listening. We want to listen for the emotional content of what the child is saying. If the child starts talking to us, even talking back to us, even yelling, to pick up on the emotion of what's going on. And if we feel like we can ask a question, if they're not too high on that crisis curve, we need to remember to ask a what question versus a why question. Most of the times people will respond to what happened, and they will talk about what was done to them or what is going on around them that is causing this feeling and this behavior. It's talking about what's external. If we ask a why question, why are you acting this way? Why are you carrying on like this? Why are you doing this? Why did you say this to me? That causes them to have to do a lot of processing and a lot of higher level thinking, which again, they're not in that level of the brain to do that. And it may put people on the defensive as well and increase the intensity of emotions. So we need to remember the importance of our tone of voice, no matter what we say to the child, and possibly start out with some understanding responses. I can see that you're mad. I can see that you're angry. I can see this is really hard for you right now. Or we may start out by saying, gosh, I'm sorry that this happened. I'm sorry that this is going on right now. To let them know we see you, we get you, we empathize with you, and we want to be a resource and a support to you. So here's some examples of things we can say, and each of us have to find what we're comfortable saying and knowing our own children, what works for our children in crisis situation. So we may start out with that statement that says, we get you. I know this is hard for you right now. I can see that you're mad at me or frustrated with me if it's an older child. I can see that you're frustrated with me right now. What happened? I can tell you don't want to do this right now. So let's just wait a minute. We'll work on this a little bit later. I can tell you don't want to talk right now. That's okay. I'll be here when you're ready. And it's important if we step away from children to give them even more space, or we pick up that they really don't want our help right now and want to be left alone and can't take someone talking to them or talking at them. We need to let them know that we get that and that we're moving away, but we are going to be available. I'll be here for you when you're ready. And it puts the control to them. When you're ready to talk to me, to have contact with me, to interact with me, I'll be here. So this statement offers a lot to the kid. It offers that we recognize what's going on, that they don't want the interaction, that I'm going to give you the space you're telling me you need, and it's up to you when you're ready to come see me, and the ball's in your court. You have control right now. The next one is, I can see I'm frustrating you right now, or a younger kid, you say I'm making you mad. I'm going to be quiet for now so I don't frustrate you anymore. Let them know that we get what's going on, we get our role in this, and we're going to stop. Or the last one, I can tell this is upsetting to you. What can I do to help, or what would help? And maybe they'll tell us what they need. I just need you to stop talking to me. Okay, I'll be quiet when you're ready to talk. That's fine. I don't want to do this right now. Okay, I can tell this is hard for you. So let's take a break and we'll work on it later. So remember statements of understanding. I can see that you're frustrated. I can see that you're mad. It helps them to know that we get them. And then if we add a request, that statement of understanding needs to go first. I can see that you're mad, so let's do something regulating. I can see that you're mad. Let's go for a walk. It may be a request to take a break from the environment. I can see that this game is frustrating you right now. Let's stop playing the game for a minute and go get a drink of water. Or if what we've asked them to do is frustrating, we put it off for a while. I can tell this is hard for you right now. Let's take a break. Just listen to some music. I'll come check on you in a minute. So we want to give them the opportunity to come down. Or we may direct them to some regulating and some coping strategies we know that has worked for them in the past. And so the last thing is to recognize when it's over, because sometimes we as the adults can keep the crisis going. Because the child starts to come down, you can hear in their tone, you can see in their behavior that they're starting to calm, that they're starting to respond to what we may ask them to do as a regulating activity or to take a break. And then as soon as they start to come down, we want to start teaching and telling them what they did wrong, what we expected them, what the rules are, what the consequences will be, and that causes them to go right up that crisis curve again. So we want to let them come all the way down and it truly be over, and they truly be calm and regulated before we get into any processing or problem solving or teaching. So here we are in the stress model of crisis again. And again, we can engage the child at any stage, the sooner the better, and bring them down the baseline. Or if we present ourselves as another obstacle, we can enrage them and send them on up this crisis curve. And again, they want an adult who's going to be an ally, somebody who can help them to co-regulate when they can't regulate themselves. So we want to remember our role in this process and do whatever we can to support them in the crisis and bring them back down to baseline, and more importantly, a calm place in their brain and their body, and to a place where they feel like they have been supported. So here we are back to our NMT mantra. First, we must regulate ourselves and help the child to regulate. We may use our relationship to co-regulate. The child doesn't have the ability to think of coping strategies or regulate themselves or make good decisions on how to calm down. They need to see us as a safe, caring caregiver, adult, parent, and see that they're safe in that relationship. And sometimes in the processing after the crisis, we may need to remind them that things are okay and we're okay and the relationship is okay, and create that relational safety. And then and only then can we reason and reflect and problem solve, and hopefully come up with some new coping strategies for all of us, and strategies that the child can use to self-regulate in the future. So I hope you found this to be helpful. Again, it may be some new strategies and techniques. May just be a reminder of some things that you already know, and it's hard to do in the midst of a crisis. I'm a parent as well. I've been in crisis situations with my kids, and there are times where I forget my own PowerPoint slides and say and do the wrong thing. But hopefully we have that time to make up for it, to say I'm sorry, and work on our own problem solving and processing skills to learn better ways to cope and support our children. So here's my email address. If you have any questions about the content of this webinar, please feel free to email me. And I know I didn't go into the situation of when true violence occurs, when a child is harming himself or others, what to do about that. And that's something we could talk through on an individual basis. But one thing that we don't teach at Harmony, and we don't recommend, is any sort of physical restraint. We suggest that you keep the child safe as possible. You keep everyone else safe, which may mean you may need to clear out a room, you may need to clear out a help and call some professional support in a situation where there is violence. But again, if there are any questions about some of the details of this training or what to do in violent situations, feel free to contact me. Here's some references, and here's a bit about me and where I'm coming from with this information. So stay well, take care of one another, and I hope to be able to see you another time. Thanks, bye.